Her mother sold her to pay a drug debt. Shaniya Davis was 5 years old. On November 10, 2009, Antoinette Davis called police in Fayetteville, North Carolina, to report that Shaniya was missing. She said she had last seen her daughter at 6 a.m. Investigators pulled surveillance footage from a nearby hotel. The footage showed a man, later identified as Mario McNeill, carrying a small child through the hotel lobby, wrapped in a blanket. The child was Shaniya. She was limp. McNeill was arrested within 24 hours. Under interrogation, he told investigators that Antoinette Davis had called him and offered her daughter in exchange for the cancellation of a drug debt. He said he took Shaniya to the hotel, where he sexually assaulted her, then drove her to a rural road in Lee County, strangled her, and left her body in a wooded area. Her remains were found 2 days later by a motorist, who noticed something in the brush off the road. She was still wearing the clothes from the hotel surveillance footage. She had been in her mother's custody for 4 months. The factual record complicates any simple explanation. Shaniya had not always lived with her mother. Her father, Bradley Lockhart, had primary custody and had raised her from infancy. In June 2009, Antoinette Davis petitioned for custody and was granted a visitation arrangement that gradually expanded. By August, she was spending extended time in Fayetteville. Bradley Lockhart grew increasingly concerned and contacted the Cumberland County Department of Social Services. He was not the only one to report worries. DSS had received prior reports related to Antoinette Davis and the conditions in her home. A single social worker conducted a home visit. The visit did not result in Shaniya's removal. By November, she was living primarily with her mother. The call McNeill received on November 9th was, investigators say, the arrangement Davis made to trade her child for relief from a debt. Hotel surveillance captured McNeill arriving with Shaniya at approximately 3 a.m. on November 10th. She was alive when he carried her in. Investigators believe she was dead before sunrise. Antoinette Davis was arrested and charged with human trafficking and first-degree murder. Names and processes matter in these narratives because they determine who can act and what redress is possible. Shaniya liked to dance. Those who knew her described a small girl with a large personality who lit rooms without trying. Bradley Lockhart spent the 4 months before her death filing paperwork and making calls, insisting repeatedly that his daughter was not safe. The social worker who visited wrote a report that noted no immediate danger. It did not capture the specificity of Bradley's concerns. Cumberland County DSS was operating under caseload pressures that advocates say stretched capacity and limited thorough investigation. The structural failure here is not that individuals were indifferent. It is that the system routes urgent parental concerns through single procedural checks that can clear and file a case without producing adequate protection. Mario McNeill was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in 2013. Antoinette Davis pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and human trafficking and received a sentence with a minimum term later adjusted. She will be eligible for release while Shaniya's father, her siblings, and those who loved her remain alive. The charge that stunned the public and reshaped the legal landscape was the trafficking allegation. At the time, North Carolina law lacked a clear statutory definition of child sex trafficking. Prosecutors pursued that charge in part because the facts demanded a classification beyond traditional abuse or homicide. Shaniya's case became a focal point in debates about statutory gaps and prosecutorial discretion. In 2013, the Protecting the Children of North Carolina Act passed. Advocates and legislators invoked Shaniya's name in hearings and lobbying. The law strengthened definitions related to child sex trafficking and established clearer protocols for interagency coordination in child welfare cases. That legislative change is, in many accounts, the most tangible policy outcome tied directly to what happened to her. Yet the law addressed statutory language and coordination without resolving the resource constraints that left DSS unable to investigate every report as comprehensively as a frightened parent might demand. Policy reform and criminal verdicts do not restore a lost childhood. Bradley Lockhart has continued to speak publicly in interviews, in legislative testimony, in the quiet persistence of a father who wants his daughter's name to matter. He describes how Shaniya never started kindergarten, never learned to read, never became the young woman he had already imagined. The family's loss is concrete. Birthdays uncelebrated, milestones never reached, a life reduced to the particulars of a case file and court testimony. The system's obligation was straightforward. Listen to the person who loved her most and take the risk seriously. It did not. that failure sits alongside the mechanics of prosecution and the language of statutory reform. And it is the element most resistant to simple remedy. Subscribe to Case Files TV because Shaniya Davis deserved better than a policy review.